Good morning, and welcome to First Church Unitarian Littleton's virtual Sunday service. My name is Cindy Malley, and I am honored to serve you as a member of your executive team and also as your deacon. And I am so glad you could join us today. The announcements this morning can be found in Community Matters, which should be in your email. Please take some time and read that through. And please be sure to read up on our upcoming virtual Silver Lining Stewardship event, which happens on the 27th, which is 2 Saturdays away. Finally, I want to wish you all a very happy Valentine's Day. I hope you know how very loved you are.
Good morning. I'm Molly Lozeau, Music Director at First Church Unitarian. The Prelude you're going to hear today is a recording made by Carolyn McCreary and Mike McKendry, piano and clarinet, respectively. And it is a recording of Nobody Knows the Trouble I've Seen, which is a traditional African-American spiritual. And this arrangement is by Larry Shackley.
The bell is full of wind, though it does not ring. The bird is full of flight, though it is still. The sky is full of clouds, though it is alone. The word is full of voice, though no one speaks it. Everything is full of fleeing, though there are no roads. Everything is fleeing toward its presence. The words of Roberto Juarroz. Let us worship. This is the time in the service where we light our chalice and say the words of our covenant together each week. And this week we are led by Lainey McManus.
Love is the spirit of this church, and service is law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and help one another.
Good job.
Unmute.
Welcome to First Church Unitarian here in Littleton, Massachusetts. I join with Malley and Cindy and the mysterious voice of Mike in welcoming you to virtual worship with us this morning, to a land where you have to unmute to speak. We're so glad that you found us this morning, whether this is your first time joining us online or whether you've been here many times before. It's great to have you with us here on YouTube Live. And my name is Lara Hoke, and I'm so happy and lucky to be the minister serving this amazing congregation. A few notes this morning. First of all, as Cindy said, happy Valentine's Day. And yes, you are indeed loved. Well said, Cindy. If you are new and you wish to learn more about our church, or if you wish to be contacted, go to our website, fculittle.org. And there you'll see a purple rectangle on the homepage. And you can click on that and fill out a virtual pew card. And we will contact you if you wish. This morning, we are thinking together about a few different things. With the coming Christian season of Lent, we will be thinking about spirituality of sacrifice. It's also Black History Month, so you'll see some hints of that today. And next week, especially, we will be concentrating on the Soul Matters theme of beloved community. So we're just beginning to go into that direction a little more today. So with that, I invite you to settle in again for a spirit of worship as we sing our opening hymn, number 188, Come, Come, Whoever You Are. And you will see the words on the screen, and you are welcome to sing along.
Come, come, wherever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving, ours is no caravan of despair. Come, yet again come. Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving, ours is no caravan of us living, ours is no caravan of despair. Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving, ours is no caravan of despair. Ours is no yet again of despair. Come, yet again come.
Thank you so much to Malley and to some members of the choir for making that lovely recording. It's time now for our time for all ages. So if there are any children or kids in your home, bring them on over. We have a really lovely story today told by Karen Tucker-Barisano, a member of our standing committee and the Religious Education Committee. Enjoy.
Good morning. We have a wonderful story today, and the title of our story is Thank You, Amu. So there is a note to the reader that Amu is pronounced Amu, and it is an Igbo term for the Queen. Thank You, Amu, and the author is Oge Mora. On the corner of First Street and Long Street, on the very top floor, Amu was cooking a thick red stew in a big fat pot for a nice evening meal. She seasoned and stirred it and took a small taste. "What a delicious stew," Amu said. "Tonight's dinner will surely be the best I've ever had." With that, Amu put down her spoon and went to read a book before supper. As the thick red stew simmered on the stove, its scrumptious scent wafted out the window and out the door and down the hall toward the street and around the block until, knock! Someone was at the door. When Amu opened, she saw a little boy. "Little boy," Amu exclaimed, "what brings you to my home?" "I was playing with my race car down the hall when I smelled the most delicious smell," the little boy replied. "What is it?" "Thick red stew." Stew," he sighed. "That sounds really yummy." Amu thought for a moment. She was saving her stew for dinner, but she had made quite a bit. It would not hurt to share. "Would you like some?" The little boy nodded. And so Amu spooned out some thick red stew from the big red pot for her nice evening meal. "Thank you, Amu," the little boy said, and went on his way. With that, Amu closed the door and went back to her book. As she read, her thick red stew's scrumptious scent wafted out the window and out the door and down the hall toward the street and around the block until, knock, knock, someone was at the door. When Amu opened the door, this time she saw a police officer. "Miss Police Officer," Amu exclaimed, "what brings you to my home?" "I was on duty down the street when I smelled the most delicious smell," Miss Police Officer replied. "What is it?" "Thick red stew." "Ah, stew," she said, and her mouth watered. "That sounds mighty tasty." Amu thought for a moment. There was still enough to share. "Would you like some?" The police officer nodded. Once again, Amu spooned out some thick red stew from the big fat pot for her nice evening meal. "Thank you, Amu," the officer said, and went on her way. And so for the second time, Amu closed the door and went back to her book. Sure enough, as she read, her thick red stew's scrumptious scent wafted out the window and out the door and down the hall toward the street and around the block until, knock, knock, knock. Again, someone was at Amu's door. This time, when she opened it, she saw a hot dog vendor. "Mr. Hot Dog Vendor," Amu exclaimed, "what brings you to my home?" "I was selling my hot dogs down the block when I smelled the most delicious smell," Mr. Hot Dog Vendor replied. "What is it?" "Thick red stew." "Ooh, stew." The vendor licked his lips. "That sounds quite delectable." So Amu spooned some thick red stew from the big fat pot for her nice evening meal. "Thank you, Amu," the hot dog vendor said, and went on his way. Throughout the day, people from all across the neighborhood knocked on Amu's door. She fed a shop owner, a cab driver, a doctor, an actor, a lawyer, a dancer, a baker, an artist, a singer, an athlete, a bus driver, a construction worker. Even the mayor stopped by. And each time they knocked, Amu shared. Soon the sky darkened, the streetlights brightened, and it was finally time for dinner. But when Amu opened her big fat pot of thick red stew for her very nice evening meal, it was empty. Amu sniffled. There goes the best dinner I ever had. Sorry and blue, she sat at the table with her empty pot until knock, 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 knock. Who could that be? Amu wondered. When she opened her door, she saw the little boy, the police officer, the hot dog vendor, the shop owner, the cab driver, the doctor, the actor, the lawyer, the dancer, the baker. Why, everyone she fed today was at her door. I'm sorry, everyone, Amu sighed. My thick red stew is all gone. I have nothing left to share. The little boy tugged at Amu's sleeve. Don't worry, Amu. We are not here to ask. We are here to give. The police officer carried in a fresh salad. The mayor entered with a roast chicken. The baker brought a collection of sweet goodies. Even the little boy presented Amu with something special in a shiny red envelope. Everyone who had knocked on Amu's door that day squeezed inside her tiny apartment, and together they ate, danced, and celebrated. While Amu's big fat pot of thick red stew empty, her heart was full of happiness and love. The dinner was the best she had ever had. The end to Thank You, Amu.
Mike? Mike?
Yeah.
I'm live. I'm live
There's-
here.
But
I'm
there's
live.
something.
I'm not a cat.
There's something wrong.
I couldn't resist. We like current events here at First Church Unitarian. If you have no idea what that was about, you'll have to Google cat, internet, judge, see what comes up. But don't do that yet. This is the time for our offering. First Church Unitarian in Littleton, Massachusetts is self-sustaining, and we rely on the generosity of our members and friends to keep our good works going, both here within our walls and out in the world beyond these walls. So if you are able this week to give an offering of your treasure, I know so often you give of your time and your talents. If you're able to give some treasure, share some treasure with us this morning. Make an offering or a pledge payment. You can either mail in a check to this address, to Attention Assistant Treasurer. You can also find that address on our website, fculittle.org, or you can go there and click on the yellow donate button to make a donation online. This morning's offering will now be given and received in grateful appreciation.
The music you'll be hearing for the Offertory today is an excerpt from a very much longer work by Sergei Rachmaninoff, a Russian composer, writing at the end of the 1800s. It's variation number 18, and it's a melody that you might recognize. It is used as a love theme in various movies and commercials and things like that. I think it's one of the most beautiful pieces of music, and I think the whole work is really, really nice. It's originally for piano and orchestra, but here you're going to hear me playing just piano on the Paganini variation number 18.
Thank you so much, Molly, and thank you to Karen Tucker-Barisano for doing such a nice reading of our story this morning. We have a reading now that will be shared by our own longtime member, Larry Lichtig, who does our videography when we're here in person, along with other things. And I think you'll enjoy his reading of a Robert Fulghum piece. And that will be followed immediately by a musical interlude. I don't know if Molly, you want to say anything about the music they will hear after the reading.
Sure. We're actually going to be playing an anthem that was performed about 2 years ago. I don't remember exactly the month, but it's from 2019, and you'll see it's a video from a service that we did back then with a lot of the members of the mixed choir, and you'll be hearing "I Cannot Count the Stars" by Eugene Butler, with myself playing piano and Rebecca Jeffries playing flute, and we'll have the lyrics scrolling across the top of the screen because it is a very beautiful poem.
Thank you. So enjoy the reading and the anthem.
This morning's reading is Chess Lesson, excerpted from Maybe, Maybe Not, Second Thoughts from a Secret Life by Robert Fulghum. Here begins the reading. Within my secret life, there are touchstones, ideas, phrases, facts, and notions I referred to time and time again, as often as I would consult a map when traveling. Among these treasures is a story from the world of chess. I'm told that during an international competition many years ago, a man named Frank Marshall made what is often called the most beautiful move ever made on a chessboard. In a crucial game, in which he was evenly matched with a Russian master player, Marshall found his queen under serious attack. There were several avenues of escape, and since the queen is the most important offensive player, the spectators assumed Marshall would observe convention and move his queen to safety. Well, deep in thought, Marshall used all the time available to him to consider the board conditions. He picked up his queen, paused, and placed it down on the most illogical square of all, a square from which the queen could be captured by any one of 3 hostile pieces. Marshall had sacrificed his queen, an unthinkable move, to be made only in the most desperate of circumstances. The spectators and Marshall's opponent were dismayed. Then the Russian and the crowd realized that Marshall had actually made a brilliant move. It was clear that no matter how the queen was taken, his opponent would soon be in a losing position. Seeing this inevitable defeat, the Russian conceded the game. When the spectators recovered from the shock of Marshall's daring, they showered the chessboard with money. Marshall had achieved a victory in a rare and daring fashion. He had won by sacrificing his queen. To me, it's not important that he won. Not even important that he actually made the queen sacrifice move. What counts is that Marshall had suspended standard thinking long enough even to entertain the possibility of such a move. Marshall had looked outside the traditional and orthodox patterns of play and had been willing to consider an imaginative risk on the basis of his judgment and his judgment alone. No matter how the game ended, Marshall was the ultimate winner. I've told that story countless times. And on the checklist of operating instructions for my life, this phrase appears. Time to sacrifice the queen?
Thank you so much. That was really beautiful. I'm so glad that we have some recordings of wonderful past performances. Thank you, choir. This coming week begins the Christian season of Lent. Lent is the Christian season leading up to Easter. Specifically, it's the 40 days from Ash Wednesday, which is this coming Wednesday, up to Easter Sunday, leaving out the Sundays. It's 40 days. For many Christians, Lent is a time for sacrifice and a time for preparation, spiritual preparation. The 40 days of Lent mirrors the 40 days of the Israelites wandering in the desert or the wilderness after the Exodus from Egypt. It also mirrors the 40 days of Jesus in the wilderness after he was baptized. The Holy Spirit appearing as a dove, and we have one on our window here too, pushes Jesus out into the wilderness where he has a time of prayer and fasting and contemplation and really preparation for his amazingly difficult ministry ahead. But the 40-day observance of Lent isn't really something that's mentioned in the Bible itself. It actually was a creation of the Catholic Church. It's an interesting invention, really, theologically. Theologically, the idea is that Jesus died for you, that Jesus died to be the sacrifice that would atone for human sin, and that we, or Christians really, should be penitent in response. And that ties into the story of Jesus in the wilderness, because Jesus was there fasting and praying for 40 days and resisting the temptations of the devil to essentially rule the world in a more obvious sort of way. And so in a symbolic sacrifice, we can give up a few things in the memory of Jesus. That's the idea. It's hard to find a modern Unitarian Universalist who subscribes to this theology that Jesus was a sacrificial lamb who died to take away the sins of the world. But today I'd like to think about sacrifice in a different way. Whether or not you choose to give up something for Lent, there's a great deal of spirituality involved in a practice of sacrifice. There can be a beauty in sacrifice. There can be wisdom found in the practice of sacrificing. Usually when we think of sacrifice, we think in terms of giving something up. One definition of sacrifice is the surrender or destruction of something prized or desirable for the sake of something considered to have a higher or more pressing claim. In early religious and spiritual traditions, that something given up was, unfortunately, often a life. Sometimes it was animal sacrifice. Sometimes it was human sacrifice. And evidence of this is found all over the world. There is much evidence all over the world of ancient human sacrifice. But over time, most cultures and religions and spiritual traditions stopped practicing basic blood sacrifices. And the concept of sacrifice evolved into something more sophisticated. In the Western religious traditions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, the story of Abraham and Isaac can be considered a crucial turning point in rethinking sacrifice. And I'm guessing most of you are at least somewhat familiar with this story found in the book of Genesis in the Hebrew scriptures. It's a story in the beginning about human sacrifice. In the story, God tells Abraham to sacrifice, of all things, his beloved son, Isaac. And Abraham is, of course, very upset and really does not want to do this, but God has told him to do it. And so Abraham is ready to sacrifice his own son, Isaac, until there's divine intervention at the last minute. And he, in fact, does not have to do that. Now, most of us, when we first hear that story, have a hard time with it. It's On the face of it, it's not a pleasant story. How could a father even consider killing his own son? But spiritually, originally for the Jewish people, later for Christians and Muslims, the point was that Abraham should be obedient to God, even to the point of sacrificing that which was dearest to him. And he passes this test. Some say that this story marks the shift in Western religious traditions from thinking in terms of bodily sacrifice to spiritual sacrifice as the proper way to worship God. Of course, this is complicated by the fact that ultimately Abraham sacrifices a ram in the place of his son. So blood is, in fact, still spilled, but it's not human blood. It establishes, though, the idea that sacrifice can be symbolic, that you can sacrifice or offer or give up something to symbolize giving it all to God or to something higher than yourself. For Christians, this story is used as a foreshadowing of God sacrificing his son, Jesus, for the sake of all humanity, all the world. And back to that sacrificial lamb theology that some people have. For Muslims, the story is an important one to establish the importance of utter surrender to God. And the name of the Muslim religion, Islam, literally means surrender to the peace of God. And a Muslim is one who surrenders to the peace of God. But if you can possibly get past the horror of the idea of human sacrifice, there is a deeper spiritual idea there. The idea is there is no higher spiritual ideal than being ready and willing and spiritually able to give up absolutely anything for a higher purpose. This reminds me of the late Unitarian Universalist minister, James Reeb. James Reeb answered Martin Luther King Jr.'s call to clergy to come to Selma, Alabama for civil rights. And James Reeb responded to that clergy call, and there in Selma, Alabama, he was murdered by white segregationists. The best known biography of Reeb, who died as a martyr of the civil rights movement, is titled No Greater Love, the James Reeb Story. And this reference is something from the Christian New Testament in the Gospel of John, where it says, there is no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friends. This can be seen as the ultimate in self-sacrifice. And it leads to a useful spiritual question I will ask you this morning. Is there anything for which you'd be willing to lay down your life? If so, what? I think some people think quickly of perhaps their children or any other close relative or dear loved one. But would you be willing to lay down your life to protect a stranger? Would you be willing to lay down your life to protect a stranger's child? Would you be willing to lay down your life for a humanitarian cause? Would you be willing to lay down your life for democracy? Would you be willing to lay down your life for an abstract belief? It's worth thinking about. That's a quick overview of the Western tradition of sacrifice. The Eastern traditions, Eastern religious traditions, have some interesting thoughts about sacrifice as well. And this is also a very cursory overview. There have been blood sacrifices historically in Eastern traditions as well, including Hinduism. Apparently, this is something that greatly upset the Buddha, understandably. In modern Eastern traditions, sacrifice has also evolved into something more sophisticated. For starters, there is in modern Eastern traditions the idea of sacrifice by symbolic substitution. So on an altar in front of a statue of, say, a Hindu avatar of God, be it Durga or Ganesha or what have you, there might be in front of that statue, or in some traditions in front of a statue of the Buddha, You might see people burning incense or placing flowers or flower petals or fruit or nuts and so on as offerings or small sacrifices to the divine. But there's another more sophisticated Eastern way of thinking about sacrifice, more abstract than anything we've yet discussed. And that's the concept, largely that of the Buddha, but also found in some Hindu interpretations, the concept of sacrificing not animal or human life, not of sacrificing physical offerings as a stand-in for blood sacrifice, but instead the idea of sacrificing attachment itself. Can you sacrifice your attachments? The Forum for Hindu Awakening puts it this way. One needs to give up the attachment to the body, mind, and wealth in order to make spiritual progress. Of these, sacrifice of wealth is the easiest as it can be done physically. One can give away all one's wealth. However, the body and mind cannot be given away so easily. The Forum goes on. Sacrifice does not mean giving away all of one's belongings. Rather, it's getting rid of one's attachments to those belongings. The ultimate idea is, as they put it, the joy in sacrificing pleasures is greater than the joy in experiencing the pleasures. We found a little bit of that in today's Time for All Ages with the story, Thank You, Amu. One great Hindu, Mahatma Gandhi, made a list of what he called the 7 sins of the modern world. One of those 7 modern sins that Gandhi named was religion without sacrifice. Gandhi said, "The sacrifice which causes sorrow to the doer of the sacrifice is no sacrifice. Real sacrifice," he said, "lightens the mind of the doer and gives him a sense of peace and joy." The Buddha gave up the pleasures of life because they had become painful for him. So in the Eastern traditions, if you are spiritually advanced enough, sacrifice isn't even a hardship. If you have given up your attachments, sacrifice is just the way to live in harmony, and it brings joy. This idea of giving up attachments reminds me of a poem called Sacrifice by my favorite poet, Audre Lorde. Lorde closes the poem with the words, "The only sacrifice of worth is the sacrifice of desire. The only sacrifice of worth is the sacrifice of desire." So giving up attachments, giving up desire itself, this leads to another useful spiritual question this morning. Have you ever sacrificed anything and found that the sacrifice actually brought you joy? I bet you can think of some times when that happened. So from the Western religious traditions, we learn that sacrifice means obedience and love of humanity, love of God, and obedience to God. From the Eastern religious traditions, we learn that sacrifice means enlightenment, really. If you are spiritually mature or enlightened, you give up attachments, and sacrifice flows naturally from that. Finally, I think of our reading today, the reading by Robert Fulghum and Sacrificing the Queen. Maybe sacrifice isn't the negation of something you hold dear. Maybe sacrifice is the confirmation that there's something to be gained by giving something up. There's something to be gained through loss. In down-to-earth thinking, in non-spiritual, everyday, practical thinking, giving something up or losing something is a bad thing. But in spiritual thinking, and in some religious traditions, this is turned on its head. Thinking spiritually, giving something up is gaining something. It's the ultimate outside of the box thinking, in a way. And so in Fulgham's chess story, sacrificing the queen, which is at first a frightful thought, turns out to be the salvation, if you will, of Frank Marshall's chess match. Marshall successfully gave up his attachment to traditional chess moves or thinking, his attachment to the conventional wisdom of chess, and in giving up his queen, his most powerful chess piece, he won it all. A beautiful, elegant chess move. And so in honor of the Lenten season, I'll end again by thinking about Jesus. Unitarian Universalist minister Roy Phillips writes about the season of Lent. Jesus went into the desert not to kill his spirit, but to nourish it. It's difficult for affluent people to understand that deprivation can be nourishing for them. They stop their ears from hearing that for those who have too much, less is sometimes more. The one remaining thing they need. Jesus went into the desert, which was nobody's domain, and came out announcing that this entire world is the arena of divine creativity, the locus of the sacred. Phillips goes on, what a mysterious realm is our world. In the dark of the soul, some have, for the first time, been able to see the inner light. Jesus went into the desert, of all places, to find nourishment. As Auden puts it, the garden is the only place there is, but you will not find it until you have looked for it everywhere and found nowhere that is not a desert. Whether or not you personally observe Lent in some fashion, may you find the spiritual wisdom that sometimes less is more, that sometimes the only thing worth desiring is the end of desire, that sometimes letting go can be a sacred act, that sometimes sacrifice can be a brilliant move, that sometimes when you lose it all, you gain it all. Blessed be, and amen. Our closing hymn this morning is number 298, Wake Now, My Senses, and you will see the words on the screen, so feel free to sing along.
Yeah.
friends, it is now time for our closing words. I invite you, as has become our online tradition, if there's someone in the room with you with whom you can safely hold hands, please do that. If you are alone in a room, as I am alone here in the sanctuary, I invite you to put your hands together and feel that warmth. And imagine your loving community and circle of neighbors and friends for our closing words. May we find that in giving, we are receiving, that in sacrificing, we are gaining. May we find that there are things worthy of our sacrifice, that in giving things up, we sometimes receive far more than we gave. With a spirit of sacrifice, of growing beyond our own personal desires, we can lead a more rich world, a more rich life, create a more rich world for our neighbors and friends. In getting past our own personal cares, may we better see the cares of others. May it be so. Blessed be, and amen.
The postlude that you'll hear today is also a recording from that same service in 2019. I decided to play Wedding at Troldhaugen. Some of you might remember it. It was actually a request. It's a piece by Edvard Grieg, and I chose a picture that I think goes with the music. I also wanted to say that I didn't use the video from that because it was just a picture. It was focused on Reverend Lara doing her after church things instead of focusing over on the piano. So here is Wedding at Troldhaugen.
What are you still doing here? I'll see you over on Zoom.